Innocence of Dreams, A New Approach to the Study of Dreams, by Charles Rycroft, abridged, read by Vincent Bagnall. Presumably, men and women have always had dreams, have been stirred by some of them, and have on occasion told them to others. It is, however, only within the 20th century and onward that dreams have aroused specific scientific interest and have been regarded as being as deserving of investigation as the shared, objective world we perceive when awake. And this delay in the emergence of a scientific interest in dreams was due, it seems, not primarily to the lack of technical devices with which to study them, but to the fact that there's something about them that makes them inherently resistant to the scientific method, at least as generally understood. The natural sciences concern themselves with phenomena which can be observed by more than one person, and which either continue to exist through extensive periods of time or recur under predictable conditions. But dreams can only be observed by the single person who dreams them. The objects that appear to be visible during them have only fleeting existence, and although they may be remembered, they cannot be observed a second time. There is no going back to have a second look at a dream or asking a colleague to confirm that we have observed it correctly. Dreams, in fact, lack that quality which would enable one to call them things, even though they accord to the shorter Oxford English Dictionary definition of a phenomenon as that of which the senses or the mind directly takes note. As a result, if one insists, as Freud did and most contemporary psychoanalysts still do, on calling them phenomena or events, they have to be distinguished from other phenomena and events by being designated subjective or mental. But even calling dreams subjective phenomena is a fiction, an intellectual ruse or device, the function of which is to enable one to talk about them as if they were the same sort of phenomena as the things we see and observe while awake, as if they were things we perceive when they are really activities of our own. Calling dreams phenomena is, in fact, a device for overcoming their resistiveness to the scientific method by treating the activity of a subject as though it were an object he had perceived. It is, however, possible to think about dreams in quite another way, as I hope to show in the main text. This is that dreams are not phenomena we observe, but experiences we have and create for ourselves, and that the appearance of objectivity presented by them is an illusion arising from two sources. First, from the fact that we have thoughts and feelings for which we wish to disown responsibility, and secondly, from the fact that we think, feel, and imagine in many different modes at the same time, and have difficulty in being conscious of them all at the same time. And more specifically, that being members of a culture which sets high value on reason and verbal ability, we may have difficulty in recognizing our visual, concrete imaginings as our own thoughts. I must explain my use of the word innocence in the title. I refer not to any presumed ignorance on the part of dreamers, nor to any presumed freedom from guilt. On the contrary, I would imagine that while dreaming we may know more than we know while awake, and may voice thoughts and wishes that evoke guilt when we awake, but rather to the idea that dreams lack knowingness, display an indifference to received categories, and have a core which cannot but be sincere and is uncontaminated by the self-conscious will. Freud's theory of dreams. Freud maintained that dreams are neurotic symptoms, or to be more precise, are analogous to neurotic symptoms inasmuch as they are constructed by the same psychological mechanisms, despite the fact that they occur not only in neurotic, but also in healthy persons. As he put it in the preface to the first edition of The Interpretation of Dreams in 1900, for psychological investigation shows that the dream is the first member of a class of abnormal psychical phenomena of which further members, such as hysterical phobias, obsessions, and delusions, are bound for practical reasons to be a matter of concern to physicians. The psychological mechanisms, which are in Freud's view common to both dreams and neurotic symptoms, are discussed critically in the following sections. Freud's idea was that dreams are a compromise between, on the one hand, wishes that have been repressed, and on the other hand, the restrictions on open expression of these wishes imposed by the repressing agency. And that furthermore, this compromise is expressed in hallucinatory form, so that the repressed wishes are represented as fulfilled, but in terms or images which ensure that their nature is not revealed. The content of a dream is the representation of a fulfilled wish. Its obscurity is due to alterations in repressed material made by the censorship. Freud also held that most of the dreams of adults express repressed erotic wishes, and that the function of dreaming is to preserve sleep, in much the same way as the function of neurotic symptoms is to preserve waking equanimity. Furthermore, he held that dreams and neurotic symptoms reveal the existence of a mode or type of mental activity very unlike that which characterizes waking thinking. And this mode, which Freud called the primary process, consists of the mechanisms of condensation and displacement, which takes no cognizance of the categories of space and time and generates not actions, but wish-fulfilling hallucinations. In Freud's view, these primary processes are primitive and archaic. Development of the capacity for adaptive, rational thought and action only occurs insofar as they are repressed, and dreams and neurotic symptoms betoken failures of repression. According to Freud, dreams are, in principle at least, abnormal phenomena and are specific events and constructions, not simply mental activity continuing during sleep and occasionally glimpsed by consciousness. They fulfill a specific function, that of preserving sleep, and they express in hallucinatory but disguised form forbidden wishes that have been repressed. According to Freud, dreams are essentially hallucinatory fulfillments of wishes which, if they remained undreamt, would awaken the dreamer. Since, however, overtly wish-fulfilling dreams are a rarity, Freud postulated the existence of some mental agency which forbade the open expression of wishes which it found unacceptable or offensive, repressed them, and insisted on distortion of the dream imagery into unrecognizable and incomprehensible form whenever the repressed wish began to express itself during sleep. This mental agency he named first the censor, and later the superego. In Freud's view, then, any particular dream is likely to be a compromise between a repressed wish, which, if unexpressed, would awaken the sleeper, and a censoring, repressing agency forbidding its open expression, the compromise being achieved by expressing the repressed wish in veiled terms, so that as a result the offensive repressed wish is, temporarily at least, disposed of and discharged without the dreamer becoming aware of its nature and meaning. If dreams are disguised hallucinatory fulfillments of repressed wishes, it follows that their meaning can only be discovered by interpretation, i.e., by unscrambling the distortions imposed by the censor, and that when interpreted, dreams turn out to express wishes that are in some way offensive to the dreamer's self-esteem or moral values. Death wishes towards loved ones, perverse, incestuous, or infantile sexual inclinations, or wishes revealing a greater degree of egotism or pride than the dreamer likes to think of himself as possessing. Condensation. This is the process or device by which two or more images are fused to form a composite image which has meaning derived from both or all, or which means that which is common to both. In Freudian theory, it is one of the primary processes characteristic of unconscious thinking. An example: A young man dreamt that he was falling headlong into some machinery, which, on investigation, proved to be a composite of the threshing machine and the electricity generating plant, which had been familiar sights on his father's farm. At the time of the dream, he had been in danger of adopting a profession of his father's choice, and the dream image of machinery condenses the two sources of his father's hold over him: his prestige as his father and his erstwhile right to punish him. Condensation of people occurs commonly in dreams, so that a person may be simultaneously the dreamer's father and husband, wife and mother, his present employer and his former teacher, his analyst and one or other of his parents, etc., the reference being in every case to that which is common in the dreamer's attitude towards both. For similar reasons, condensations of sexual organs also occur, leading to images of penile breasts, vaginal and anal mouths, and even anal breasts and vaginal penises. Some analysts, for example, Ella Sharp in her dream analysis, also use the term condensation to describe the fact that dreams tend to be shorter than their interpretation, i.e. that it takes fewer words to describe a dream than to explicate its interpretation, and that single details in dreams may allude to several topics or themes. In this sense, condensation describes the non-discursive quality of dreams, a quality they share with poems, jokes, music, and paintings, in which the various themes, points, meanings are not spelled out serially, as in indicative and expository prose, but are interwoven or presented simultaneously. This way of looking at the matter assumes, however, that prosaic discursive formulations are the norm, and that poetic, dreamy, and representational non-discursive formulations are special cases which require explanation by invoking some specific process. Displacement. Displacement is the term used by Freud to describe the process by which the meaning of something is transferred onto something else, so that the latter stands for, symbolizes, refers to, replaces, alludes to the former. In Freudian theory, it is one of the primary processes characteristic of unconscious thinking. In Freud's own theorizing, what is conceived to be displaced is mental energy, libido or cathexis, which is imagined to be withdrawn from one mental image and displaced onto another one, which then becomes a symbolic substitute, equivalent or successor for or of the former. The analogy being to an electric charge, which can be moved, from one structural unit of the mind, itself conceived of as an apparatus, to another. If, however, one drops the mechanical-electrical analogy, what is displaced can be seen to be meaning or interest. The unconscious and the id. When Freud postulated that the mind could be likened to an apparatus consisting of two parts or subsystems, the conscious or ego and the unconscious or id, each characterized by different modes of thinking, the secondary and primary processes, respectively, he had to include the rider that parts of the conscious could at times be unconscious, i.e. that thoughts belonging to the system conscious could be deceptively unconscious, and that parts of the unconscious could at times be conscious, that parts of the system unconscious could at times be descriptively conscious, dreams being the prime and most familiar example of the latter. What he meant by this was that although we are aware while dreaming of what we are dreaming and may on occasion be able to remember our dreams, the mode of thinking exemplified in dreaming is that of the system unconscious, not that of the system conscious, that the laws governing the construction of dreams are not those governing the construction of waking thoughts, i.e. the arrangement of words sequentially with respect for syntax, logic, and the categories of space and time, but something quite different, a set of rules by which images, not words, are fused with one another, condensation, replace one another, displacement, symbolize one another, symbolization, in a context that disregards the categories of space and time. This set of rules Freud designated the primary processes. In 1923, Freud renamed the unconscious the id, or rather, Freud's English translators used id, which is the Latin for it, to translate his das Es, the it, a term he borrowed from Grodeck. Freud's id and Grodeck's it do not, however, mean exactly the same thing, as comparison of the following quotations shows. According to Grodeck, body and mind are one unit that contain an it, a force, which lives us while we believe we are living. The it, which is mysteriously connected with sexuality, with eros, or whatever you choose to call it, shapes man's nose and hand, as well as his thoughts and emotions. In Grodeck's view, the it is that by which we are dreamt. It is the agent which sends us messages to which we may or may not listen, which we may or not understand. It is the impersonal self by which our personal, egotistical self is lived. According to Freud, however, the id contains everything that is inherited, that is present at birth, that is laid down in the constitution. Above all, therefore, the instincts which originate from the somatic organization and find a first psychical expression here, i.e. in the id, in forms unknown to us. In Freud's view, then, the id is the source of the wishes that seek hallucinatory wish fulfillment in dreams. But the agent who constructs the dreams is not the id, but that part of the mind which converts wishes into disguised symbolic form in order to preserve sleep. Dreams from below and dreams from above. Although Freud continued throughout his life to subscribe to his own theory of dreams, in the 1920s, he made a partial concession to the more common sense idea that dreams are a continuation in sleep of thoughts which were exercising the sleeper while he was awake, by distinguishing between dreams from below and dreams from above. Dreams from below are those which are provoked by the strength of an unconscious repressed wish, which has found a means of being represented in some of the day's residues. They may be regarded as inroads of the repressed into waking life. Dreams from above correspond to thoughts or intentions of the day before which have contrived during the night to obtain reinforcement from repressed material that is debarred from the ego. It should be noted, however, that this formulation continues to give primacy to repressed material that is debarred from the ego, and that Freud is not really distinguishing between two different kinds of dreams, but merely stating that imagery and ideas derived from repressed materials and days residues may be mixed in differing proportions in different dreams. Days residue is the technical Freudian term for those elements in a dream which derive from some event, observation, or thought which occurred to the dreamer during the waking period immediately prior to the sleep in which the dream took place. According to Ernest Jones, who was always a more intransigent Freudian than Freud himself ever was, in every dream, without exception, occur mental processes experienced by the subject in the last waking interval. The experience in question may be either psychically significant or indifferent. In the latter case, however, it's always associated with some underlying significant experience. The inference is that dream formation requires an instigator or trigger event in the dreamer's waking life, and this instigator bearing some actual or symbolic relation to a repressed impulse striving for expression. Dreams of the neurotic and the healthy. Freud's assumption that dreams are analogous to neurotic symptoms led him to argue that the healthy are virtual neurotics. But the dreams of neurotics do not differ in any important respect from those of normal people. It is possible, indeed, that they cannot be distinguished from them at all. It would be absurd to give an account of the dreams of neurotics which could not also apply to the dreams of normal people. We must therefore say that the difference between neurosis and health holds only during the day. It is not prolonged into dream life. We are obliged to carry over to healthy people a number of hypotheses which arise in connection with neurotics as a result of the links between the latter's dreams and their symptoms. We cannot deny that healthy people as well possess in their mental life what alone makes possible the formation both of dreams and of symptoms, and we must conclude that they too have carried out repressions, that they expend a certain amount of energy in order to maintain them, that their unconscious system conceals repressed impulses which are still cathected with energy, and that a portion of their libido is withdrawn from their ego's disposal. Thus, a healthy person, too, is virtually a neurotic. But dreams appear to be the only symptoms which he is capable of forming. In this passage, Freud maintains that dreams are symptoms, but also that they are universal occurrences. He maintains that the distinction between neurotic and healthy is a real one, but that the essential mechanism of neurosis, repression, occurs universally among the healthy, and he implies both that psychoanalysis is a form of treatment for neurotics and that it is applicable to the healthy too. It would, one feels, have been much simpler to argue that the distinction between health and neurosis does not survive psychoanalytical scrutiny, that dreams are not symptoms, but normal events, which conform to the same rules in everyone, regardless of whether they suffer from neurotic symptoms or not, but that dreams offer a special mode of access to understanding the personal conflicts that give rise to neurotic symptoms. 2. Jung's view of dreams. Jung seems from the very beginning to have regarded dreams as creations, as messages from an agent, though he seems also to have had some difficulty in deciding who or what this agent is, or perhaps better, in finding a satisfactory term for naming him or it. Hence, such statements as, "The dream is a mysterious message from our night aspect," and "one does not dream, one is dreamed." We undergo the dream. We are the objects. The latter formulation leaves the subject, the dreamer who composes the message, unnamed. According to Yolanda Jacobi, the fundamental difference between Jungian and other analytical theories of dreams is that the Jungian regards dreams as manifestations and creations of not only the personal, but also the collective unconscious. So in the Jungian view, the agent who sends messages in dreams is both the personally impersonal part of oneself, what Freud, following Grodeck, called the id, or it, and the collectively impersonal part of oneself, which one shares with others. Jung seems also to have believed that we continually dream even while awake. It is on the whole probable that we continually dream, but that consciousness makes such a noise that we do not hear it. This statement implies that Jung did not distinguish between dreaming and what Freudians call unconscious fantasy, and that he rejected Freud's view that dreams are specific events and constructions, the function of which is to preserve sleep by granting the dreamer disguised, hallucinatory fulfillment of wishes, which would otherwise wake him up. As a result, Jungian theory has no concept of dream work and does not assume that the function of symbolism in dreams is to disguise the nature of the wishes being expressed in them. There is no reason under the sun why we should assume that the dream is a crafty device to lead us astray. In the event, both Freud and Jung seem to be partly right, partly wrong. Laboratory research on the physiology of dreaming suggests that dreams are specific events and that we do not dream continually, even during sleep, but does not support Freud's idea that we dream in order not to wake up. It suggests, rather, that dreaming is a phasic activity and that one of the reasons why we sleep is in order to dream, and that the function of dreaming has more to do with integration and making psychophysical rearrangements than with hallucinatory gratification of repressed wishes. And the evidence provided by dreams reported by people not in analytical treatment suggests that symbolization in dreams does not occur in order to conceal the nature of inadmissible wishes. The same dreamer may express the same idea directly and symbolically in successive dreams. the collective unconscious. This Jungian concept postulates a part or layer of the mind which is common to all men and which is responsible for producing dreams, myths, visions, and religious ideas. The concept seeks to explain why the dreams and delusions of Western man may resemble the myths and religious ideas of cultures with which the Western dreamer, or psychotic, is personally unfamiliar. The concept, which came to a Jung in a dream, seems to be capable of two interpretations. First, that there is indeed some sort of group mind, parts of which may be located within or under the personal minds of individuals. And secondly, that the fundamental and perennial interests of mankind, to quote a phrase of Jones, are so uniform that persons of different cultures may spontaneously and independently create identical symbolic imagery, the likelihood of this happening being increased by the fact that human bodies and biological functions are everywhere similar, and that therefore metaphors based on body symbolism, i.e. on resemblances between objects external to the self and bodily parts and functions, are likely to be universally comprehensible. When we act unconsciously, it is we ourselves who are unconscious of the act we performed, but it is not at all clear who is or should be regarded as unconscious of acts performed collectively unconsciously. The circumstances under which Jung had the dream which led him to discover the collective unconscious strongly suggest that he was concerned at the time to liberate himself from Freud's influence and to establish a territory of his own. The term persona was used by Jung to describe the mask or demeanor which people adopt to deal with the requirements of everyday life. According to Jung, people who identify excessively with their persona are apt to have dreams in which a person conspicuously unlike their persona appears. This other opposite person being the dreamer's shadow. As an example of persona and shadow, Bagnall cites a punctilious bank official who recurrently dreamt that while looking up at night he became aware of a figure trying to break into his house. This figure would move from window to window, each of which he closed in the nick of time, but eventually the intruder outstripped him, burst in through a door, at which point the dreamer woke with a start. The implication is that the intruder represented all that the bank official had disowned of himself. Plato, one imagines, would have approved the concepts of persona and shadow. In all of us, even in good men, there is a lawless, wild beast nature which peers out in sleep. Initial dreams. Initial dream is a Jungian term referring to a dream recounted by a patient at the onset of treatment, and often provoked by the prospect of starting treatment. It frequently happens at the very beginning of treatment that a dream will reveal to the doctor, in broad perspective, the whole program of the unconscious. Freudian analysts are also taught to pay particular attention to the first dream their patients tell them. As an example of an initial dream, Bagnall cites a woman who dreamt the night before her first interview with him that she was alone in a stockaded enclosure set in a tropical forest. Outside were a variety of wild animals, including a lion, a tiger, and a hippopotamus, watching her. Bagnall drew the rather obvious conclusion that this woman was frightened of her instincts, represented by the wild animals, and had to exclude them. Rather similarly, a patient of mine dreamt the image of a bird in a cage. It emerged that, like a bird in a cage, she could sing beautifully, but do nothing else, and that her mother had been a barmaid throughout her childhood. Cage bars, public house bars, and musical bars combined to form a cluster of images capable of being used to express ideas about expressive activity and their inhibition and control. I should, however, be guilty of being wise after the event if I pretended that my patient's initial dream revealed more to me when I first heard it than that she felt inhibited. When I appreciated how musical she was, did I realize that her dilemma was that she could sing but not fly. Anticipatory dreams. Jung used this term to describe dreams in which something appears to happen that does not in fact later happen. Anticipatory dreams may give the impression of being prophetic, but are in fact evidence that while asleep as while awake, we may envisage the possible outcomes of things we are concerned about, and that of the various possibilities we envisage, one may be what actually happens. But just as our conscious thoughts often occupy themselves with the future and its possibilities, so do the unconscious and its dreams. Anticipatory dreams are no more prophetic than a medical diagnosis or a weather forecast. They are merely an anticipatory combination of probabilities which may coincide with the actual behavior of things, but need not necessarily agree in every detail. Amplification and active imagination. This is a technique of dream interpretation used by Jungians. The dreamer is asked to amplify on the dream, to give his impressions of it, to say what strikes him particularly about it. It plays a role analogous to that played in Freudian analysis by free association. Amplification in the extended sense of asking the dreamer to make up additions to the dream would presumably be active imagination. This is a Jungian therapeutic technique of encouraging patients to enter, while awake, into a frame of mind analogous to dreaming, in which images have a life of their own, and symbolic events develop according to their own logic. That is, of course, if your conscious reason does not interfere. Bagnall likens this frame of mind to a Brown study, and argues, following Jung, that we can train ourselves to induce it and thereby contact the unconscious while still awake and conscious. Both Bagnall and Jung are careful to distinguish active imagination from fantasy in the sense of daydreaming, which is our own invention and remains on the surface of personal things and conscious expectations. Bagnall and Jung are, I think, making the same distinction as Coleridge made between imagination and fancy, the former being the activity, if that is the right word, of allowing familiar images to dissolve and fuse, to create new ones, the latter being that of resembling images already constituted. Imagination. The shorter Oxford English Dictionary lists 3 non-obsolete definitions of the word imagination, all of which are applicable to dreams. First, imagination is the action of imagining or forming a mental concept of what is not actually present to the senses. Secondly, it is that faculty of the mind by which we conceive the absent as if it were present. And thirdly, it is the power which the mind has of forming concepts beyond those derived from external objects. Dreaming is, accordingly, an imaginative activity, since first, it forms mental images of what is not actually present to the senses. Secondly, it conceives such images as though they were present. And thirdly, it forms concepts beyond those derived from external objects. 2 qualifications need, however, to be made to the statement that dreaming and indeed imaginative activity in general forms concepts beyond those derived from external objects. First, the clinical evidence in respect of dreams and the literary evidence in respect of poetic imagination suggests that the apparently novel images appearing in dreams and poems are not created out of nothing, are not conjured out of nowhere, but are produced by the fragmentation of images derived from external objects and the recombination of the resulting fragments. Freud called this process condensation, and Coleridge called it secondary imagination, which dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate. Secondly, the clinical evidence suggests that the external objects of which concepts and images are formed during dreaming include the dreamer's own body and parts of it. Recognition of the fact that dreaming is imaginative activity occurring during sleep and is not, as Freud argued, a symptom analogous to the hallucinations of the insane or the conversion symptoms of hysterics, is both liberating and simplifying. It allows a universally occurring experience, or a universally experienced occurrence, to be regarded as healthy and normal and not as, in principle, pathological. It obviates the need to argue, as Freud did, that the healthy are virtual neurotics and that the imaginative and creative are actual neurotics. And, as I have already mentioned, Freud expended much ink and energy trying to prove that artists are neurotics, only reluctantly abandoning the attempt when in 1928 he wrote, "Before the problem of the creative artist analysis must, alas, lay down its arms." But I am suggesting the creative artist only constituted for him a problem, which had, alas, to be abandoned, because he had started by assuming that dreams are symptoms, and that waking imaginative activity resembles dreaming, and must therefore also be a symptom. Things would have been much easier for him and his followers if he had made the opposite assumption, that imagination is a normal, universal function or faculty, that dreaming is its sleeping form, and that if people have neurotic conflicts, these will manifest themselves in their dreams and their waking imaginative products. Asleep, we cannot make ourselves do anything, even dream. We just do dream. And even the most experienced analysis and or analyst continues to be surprised by his dreams. This point was well made by Darwin, who wrote, "The imagination is one of the highest prerogatives of man. By this faculty he unites former images and ideas, independently of the will, and thus creates brilliant and novel results. A poet, as Jean-Paul Richter remarks, who must reflect whether he shall make a character say yes or no to the devil with him. He is only a stupid corpse. Dreaming gives us the best notion of his power. As Jean-Paul again says, the dream is an involuntary kind of poetry." All dreams must be deemed imaginative in the sense that they consist of images of what is not present conceived as though they were present, and are created independently of the will. But some, perhaps, even most, dreams are fanciful rather than imaginative, inasmuch as they consist of images and units of meaning which already form part of the furniture of the dreamer's mind without the creation of any new images or meaning. Coleridge's view was that imagination recreates in order to say something new, while fancy is no other than a mode of memory, emancipated from the order of time and space, and must receive all its materials ready-made from the law of association. Dreams. According to the Shorter Oxford English Dictionary, a dream is a train of thoughts, images, or fancies passing through the mind during sleep, and to dream is to have visions and imaginary sense impressions in sleep. True dreams differ, therefore, from daydreams, reveries, castles in the air, etc., in occurring by definition during sleep, and in being experienced as though they were sensations without any awareness, while they are occurring, that they are being made up by the dreamer himself as he goes along. The Shorter Oxford English Dictionary mentions the suggestion made by Klug that the word dream is connected with German roots, meaning to deceive. It is only on waking reflection that they are recognized as products or creations of one's own mind. That is, by modern Western secular man who is not inclined to take seriously the idea that they could be products or creations of someone else's mind. If dreaming is an imaginative activity, dreams must mean something. That being so, there must be a subject, an agent who is engaged during dreaming in the activity of intending or conveying meaning. This subject or agent can only, unless one takes seriously the possibility of supernatural or telepathic interventions, be some aspect of the dreaming sleeper himself. And the dream he constructs must be a message, in which case there must be an indirect object, a recipient, for whom the dream message is intended and who can be imagined capable of receiving the message and understanding the sense being conveyed to him. In other words, dreamers must dream for or to someone. And that someone can only be the dreamer himself. It is only in psychotherapeutic relationships and in cultures that employ dream interpreters as diviners that people dream with the intention of telling their dreams to someone else. Dreaming is thus a form of communicating or communing with oneself and is analogous to such waking activities as talking to oneself, reminding oneself, exhorting oneself, consoling oneself, frightening oneself, entertaining oneself, or exciting oneself with one's own imagination, and perhaps more particularly to such waking meditative imaginative activities as summoning up remembrance of things past, or envisaging the prospect of things future. Dreaming is a special case of reflexive mental activity in which the self becomes twofold. One part observing, arguing with, reflecting upon, resisting the implications of, assenting to ideas, thoughts, situations imaginatively presented to it by the other. The speciality of the case deriving from two features of sleep. First, during sleep the body is immobilized, and dreamers can therefore present to themselves wishes and situations in the certainty that they will not immediately act upon them. It appears indeed that most, perhaps all, dreams occur in the so-called paradoxical phase of sleep, during which the body is at one, and the same time restless and maximally immobilized, and the sleeper hard to arouse. And secondly, during sleep, it is the higher cortical functions that are most asleep. And as a result, dreamers present their imaginings to themselves, not in the discursive language they use to convey meanings to others, but in non-discursive symbolism. In other words, dreamers, since they are asleep and communing with themselves, do not, as waking talkers do, convey meaning by finding words with an agreed meaning and uttering them in the right order, but instead by conjuring up evocative imagery and relating the particular images evoked to one another spatially as well as temporarily. As a result, dreams tend to resemble moving pictures more than they resemble literary texts. Dreams as communications. If dreams have meaning, as is being assumed throughout this book, they must be communications from one entity or agency to another. In psychotherapy, it's often assumed that they are communications from the patient to the therapist, often to the extent that the therapist also assumes that they are communications about him, i.e., that all dreams are amenable to transference interpretation. Lovers and friends who tell one another their dreams are using dreams as communications, though here it is often a case of the medium being itself the message, since the point of the exchange is as much the sense of intimacy induced by the sharing of dreams as the conveying of any particular insight, information, or feeling. However, although psychotherapists may have good pragmatic reasons for treating their patient's dream as though they were communications to themselves, and lovers may have good emotional reasons for sharing their dreams, the idea that dreaming is a form of interpersonal communication is not seriously tenable. Dreaming occurs when we are subjectively, if not objectively, alone. Everyone dreams, but only a few people have psychotherapists to tell them to. The majority of dreams are forgotten before the awakened dreamer can have any opportunity to tell them to anyone. Many dreams are so unpleasant or peculiar or complicated that their dreamer has to overcome reluctance to tell them even when he has a therapeutic or scientific reason for doing so. Only in cultures like the Sonoy, the Malayan tribe, in which the telling and interpreting of dreams is part of the breakfast routine, do people ever recount dreams as a matter of course. Elsewhere, dreams are only recounted for some special reason, because one is psychotherapy, because one is participating in a scientific experiment, because one is consulting a soothsayer or romancer, or because there seems to be something special about the dream which justifies telling it to someone else, i.e. because one is uncertain as to whether it was a dream or not, because it appears to refer to some event one could not have known about, or because it strikes one as entertainingly absurd or funny. In these last cases, one is, however, not recounting the dream as a dream for its own sake, but because it is a possible real event, or a possible telepathic experience, or because it can be told as a joke. So dreams must be communications not between two persons, but between two aspects of the same person. They must, as contemporary jargon has it, be intrapersonal, not interpersonal, communications. As Jung said, the dream is a mysterious message from our night aspect. And according to Calvin Hall, a dream is a personal document, a letter to oneself. It is not a newspaper story or magazine article. Both these statements emphasize the essential private nature of dreaming, but neither helps much when it comes to defining the difference between the self who dreams and the self who receives dreams and on occasion remembers them. Classical Freudian psychoanalysis sidestepped this problem by objectifying dreams, by treating them as hallucination-like mental phenomena which did not require an agent who constructed them. And since they were mental events that happened to, that were perceived by people when they were asleep. Dreams as sources of information. When we talk or write, we convey more information to our audience than just the specific intended meaning of the sentence we have uttered. This is because our accent, our style, our vocabulary, and syntax, our use or misuse of metaphor and allusion, our precise or vagueness of expression, reveal aspects of ourselves over and above our wish to convey some particular meaning. While speaking, we unwittingly, though not necessarily unwillingly, reveal information about our social class, education, and intelligence, and also, in all but the briefest utterances, information about our habits of thought, our values, prejudices, and preoccupations. Indeed, we even, as a series of papers by Cobb and Lorenz has shown, betray our psychiatric diagnosis. If we use the word it frequently and vaguely, we are probably hysterical. If we habitually construct sentences in two opposed parts, joined by a but, we are probably obsessional. If we scramble syntax or consistently fail to reveal whether we are talking literally or metaphorically, we are probably schizoid. It seems, in fact, that it is impossible for an agent to utter meaningful statements without at the same time revealing information about himself or his self, his biography, personality, and character. Even the apparent obvious exception turns out to prove the rule, since the capacity to make scientific and mathematical statements accurately, precisely, and impersonally reveals assimilation of the cultural ideal of objectivity and an ability to imagine oneself outside the system of which one is in fact a part. Patients in psychoanalysis. The dreams of patients in psychoanalytical treatment acquire a number of extrinsic meanings and meta-meanings, additional to their primary meanings, as messages from one part of the dreamer to another. These arise from the fact that the patient dreamer knows that his analyst wants to hear about his dreams, considers them to be suitable material for interpretation, and may be predisposed to interpret them as communications to and about himself. As a result, remembering or forgetting dreams, telling or withholding them, telling them reluctantly or enthusiastically, and in extenso or ad nauseum, acquire meanings derived from the nature of the patient's feelings about his analyst and his expectations from him, these additional meanings being in principle and often in practice distinct from the meanings contained in the text of the dream. Just as between hosts and guests, the motives for offering food and gifts often have little or nothing to do with the actual nature of food and gifts, and a lot to do with making or resisting overtures of friendship. So reporting or withholding dreams by a patient are often gestures designed to please, appease, annoy, overwhelm, or impress the analyst. These motives being adventitious and additional to the meanings contained within the dreams themselves. Under such circumstances, dreams, or more strictly the telling of them, themselves become symbols. Any particular dream representing a gift given or withheld, a challenge to test the analyst's skill and pretensions, a red herring to divert his attention from the person of the patient by embroiling him in the subtleties, ingenuities, and obscurities of his dreams. Furthermore, since patients only enter analytical treatment because they are in distress of some kind and form transferences of greater or lesser intensity, the person of the analyst, his voice, his mannerisms, his utterances, the objects in his consulting room, all readily become part of his store of significant images. As a result, the dreams of patients in analytical treatment tend to contain allusions and references to the analyst and his ambiance, and to include messages which are, in the first instance, to and about him, but only in the first instance and not finally, since transference determines that the analyst becomes a symbol in the patient's mind for significant figures in his present and past and for aspects of his own self. Action language. In a series of papers and books culminating in a new language for psychoanalysis, Roy Schaefer, an American psychoanalyst, has proposed that the findings of psychoanalysis should be reformulated in what he calls action language. Action language assumes that psychoanalysis is not a natural science, but one of the humanities. It dispenses with all concepts borrowed from physics, chemistry, and biology, and seeks instead to formulate all statements about human behavior and feeling in terms of a person or agent who acts, not in response to causes which impel him, but for reasons which seem to him to be cogent. Some passages in this book can be heard as attempts to apply action language to dreams, and assume that, strictly speaking, there are no such phenomena as dreams, but rather persons who dream, who perform the action of constructing meaningful imaginative sequences, and that interpreting dreams is essentially a process of ascertaining the dreamer's reasons for confronting himself with these imaginative sequences. In other words, elucidating what ideas, feelings, and insights he's trying to express and communicate to himself, or in the case of people who report their dreams to someone else, to that other person. According to this view of dreaming, the general theory of dreams concerns itself with three questions. First, what range of thoughts and feelings may be expressed or formulated in dreaming? Is it identical with or more or less extensive than the range of thoughts and feelings with which we concern ourselves while awake? The answer to this first question seems to be that in one respect, the range is more extensive, and in another respect, it's less extensive. On the one hand, we seem to be less restricted by personal and social hypocrisies while asleep and dreaming than we are while awake, and may in fact dream of many things that while awake we would never, we like to think, even dream of doing. On the other hand, we seem to be more egocentric while dreaming than we are while awake. It seems to be our own pleasure, happiness, suffering, pride, shame, survival, and destiny, not that of others, with which we are concerned with while asleep. Calvin Hall reports that he was collecting dreams from American students during the last few days of the war with Japan and did not encounter a single reference to the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In this sense, dreaming is an egotistic activity, just as sleep itself is. Secondly, what are the grammatical rules, not scientific laws, governing the construction of those imaginative sequences we call dreams? And what relation have these rules to the true grammatical rules governing the formation of sentences formulating while awake? The answer to the second question seems to be that dreaming obeys the rules of non-discursive symbolism. Unlike discursive language in which permanent, conventionalized units of meaning are successively understood and gathered together to form an overall meaning, that of the sentence understood as a whole, dream language consists of transient, private images which derive their meaning from their relations within the total structure that constitutes the dream. Or rather, since dreams differ from sentences in having no clearly defined beginning and end, and in being blurred at the edges as well from their relations within the total structure from which the remembered, reported dream has emanated, this total structure being in principle the dreamer's whole mind or being. Thirdly, why, if dreams are meaningful utterances couched in non-discursive symbolism, are they commonly not understood by the person who dreams them? If dreams are messages or letters to oneself, why does the dreamer so frequently construct the dream in such a way that he cannot elucidate it himself? There seem to be two current answers to this question. The first is that the message is, as it were, deliberately constructed so as not to be understood, and some of the rules governing the formation of dreams are devices to ensure that they will be undecipherable by the dreamer when he has awoken. This answer, which was Freud's, assumes that the messages in dreams concern matters about which the waking self does not want to know, and implies the existence of conflict between two different selves, one of which seeks to express wishes, feelings, and thoughts, which the other does not want to hear about. The dream being a device by which the dreamer achieves a hypocritical compromise. One self is allowed its say, provided the other self can assert that it is talking nonsense and need not listen to what it is saying, symbolism being the specific device by which this compromise is achieved. According to this view, dreams are essentially disguised expressions of wishes, thoughts, and feelings which, if expressed openly, would have awakened the sleeping dreamer, and which, if understood by him, would disturb his equanimity and compel him to alter his conception of himself. Dreaming is, strictly speaking, not the creation of an agent who is trying to communicate something true, but a defensive hypocritical maneuver engaged in by someone who is trying to deceive himself. And dream interpretation is a technique for elucidating the truth that lies concealed in false messages. The self. Since we are unaware, while dreaming, that we are ourselves creating the dream that we are having, all psychologies that attribute meaning to dreams have to postulate the existence of two selves. One which is restricted to what we know of ourselves when awake and conscious, and which is capable of acting, willing, and reflecting upon its activities. And another which embraces the whole of the personality, including that part of ourselves that dreams. The former self is aware of its own identity and refers to itself as I, or me. The latter self, experienced as impersonal, and tends to be referred to as it, or one. The personal quality of the conscious self and the impersonal quality of the wider self is reflected in the psychoanalytical division of the personality into an ego, or I, which is largely conscious and can act, will, and on occasion become self-aware, and an id, or it, which is largely unconscious and cannot act or will, and manifests itself into dreams and imaginative activity. Poets have also described the impersonal quality of the source of their creative activity. For instance, Rimbaud said both "en me pense" and "je suis un auteur." The relationship between these two selves differs from person to person. If the personal I self is sharply opposed to the impersonal it self, the individual possesses what Jung called a persona, a mask, a sharply defined and rigidly circumscribed personality. And his dreams will recurrently present to him figures, which Jung called shadows, who engage in activities totally alien to his waking self and who attempt to break into his house. In the less personal language of Freudian psychoanalysis, such people suffer from character neurosis, have rigid defensive egos, and are out of touch with their unconscious. In Reichian terminology, they are imprisoned in character armor. If the personal I self is habitually concerned to accommodate itself to the needs and expectations of others without taking cognizance of its own needs and nature, the individual possesses what Winnicott called a false self, his true self being submerged, and as it were in abeyance. In Winnicott's view, the false self is also a caretaker self, maintaining the true self inviolate until it is safe for it to emerge. If, on the other hand, the personal I self is on good terms with the impersonal it self, the individual will be in touch with himself, not fighting himself, not hiding himself, not running away from himself, not searching for himself. And he will require neither persona, nor rigid defenses, nor character armor. Such a person is healthy in the true sense of being whole, not divided. Metaphor and symbol. Metaphor is the figure of speech by which one thing or process is described in terms belonging literally to some other thing or process, or by which the names and descriptive terms literally applicable to one thing or process are transferred to some other thing or process. Since the novel and unfamiliar can only be described in terms of the familiar, and the abstract can originally only be described in terms of the concrete, vocabulary is largely built on metaphor, and we use it whenever we speak or write, often without knowing that we're doing so. It must, for instance, be unusual for anyone using the word trivial to be aware while doing so that he is describing a thought as though it were a road that had reached a trivium, a place where three ways meet, and where presumably it is immaterial in which direction one proceeds. The ability to use metaphor depends on the capacity to see a similarity between things or processes that are in other ways dissimilar, a capacity which seems to be intuitive in the sense that one either sees the similarity or one doesn't. As Aristotle put it, a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in dissimilars. Textbooks on grammar divide metaphors into dead and live. Dead metaphors being those which have become built into language and do not usually evoke any image of the object or process to which they literally refer, and live metaphors being those which, as Fowler puts it, are offered and accepted with a consciousness of their nature as substitutes for their literal equivalents, and do evoke imagery of the things and processes to which they literally refer. If I refer to an error as glaring, I am using a dead metaphor, since I do not expect my audience to conjure up an image of eyes glaring. It seems to be in the nature of things that one can no more create live metaphors to order than dream to order. If I quote Nashi and say, "Beauty is but a flower which wrinkles will devour," I am using live metaphor. That beauty is a flower may be dead metaphor, but that wrinkles may devour, not replace or obliterate, conjures up blight. Diseases in plants due to fungoid parasites, worms, thyme, rodent ulcer, skin cancer induced by excessive exposure to sunlight, and is a live metaphor. It is the contention of this book that dreaming is an imaginative activity and that the imagery occurring in dreams is to be understood metaphorically, and that dream interpretation consists in discovering to what subject or theme the concrete imagery of dreams metaphorically applies. Whereas when used as a figure of speech, metaphor is used with consciousness of its nature as a substitute for direct statement. When used while dreaming, metaphor is presented as though it meant itself, and it requires the addition of waking, reflective consciousness to ascertain to what it applies. Or alternatively, imagery in dreams fulfills a function the reverse of that fulfilled by metaphor in waking speech. Metaphor in waking speech adds to or defines more precisely and vividly a meaning already and consciously intended. Imagery in dreaming lacks as yet the meaning that will turn it into metaphor. It is, as it were, a thought that has yet to acquire the author who will give it metaphorical meaning. Poetic imagery, which characteristically contains more meanings than the poet can have been fully conscious of when it first arose in him, occupies an intermediate position between the imagery of waking speech and dreaming. When Nash wrote, "Beauty is but a flower," he probably knew exactly what he was saying, but the implications of "which wrinkles will devour" probably only struck him after the word devour had occurred to him as a rhyme for flower. In other words, metaphor in ordinary prosaic speech follows meaning. Metaphor in dream precedes meaning, and metaphor in poetry coexists with meaning. As an example of the metaphorical nature of dreams, I cite a dream which depends largely on dead metaphor. A young woman dreamt that she was in a shop, choosing shirts, taking several off the counter and draping them on the back of her current boyfriend. The shop apparently also sold fish, which were swimming about in a tank, though, horror of horrors, one of her cats was drowning in this tank. This dream makes sense if one remembers that a dead metaphor allows one to speak of putting one's shirt on someone. Another asserts that there are plenty of fish in the sea, and slang allows one to shop around for a new lover. But horror of horrors, if an ambitious woman does put her shirt on a particular man, does not select one particular fish from all those available. Something of herself may have to be submerged and perhaps die. This dream also exemplifies another point about the use of metaphor in dreams. Since dreaming is a private, self-to-self communication, the rules of literary good taste are irrelevant, and metaphors can be mixed and cliches manhandled in ways that would be unacceptable and absurd in speech. Although this young woman may well on occasion speak of putting her shirt on someone, or remind herself that there are plenty of fish in the sea, or decide that it is time she went shopping around again, it is unlikely that she would ever include all three metaphors in the same sentence. Symbolism. Since the images appearing in dreams are virtual and do not correspond to objects that are actually being perceived, and since further they often make no sense if presumed to refer to the objects they themselves depict, they must often be symbols referring to or standing for something other than themselves. In other words, theories which assert that dreams have meaning and can be interpreted must of necessity also assert that the imagery of dreams is often symbolic, and that individual images occurring in dreams may stand for objects and ideas other than themselves. All this would be plain sailing if Freudian theory had not introduced a confusing compilation by asserting that the symbols occurring in dreams differ radically from other symbols. According to Ernest Jones, whose paper The Theory of Symbolism remains the classic statement of the Freudian position, there is such a thing as true symbolism, which can be distinguished from what he calls symbolism in its widest sense, and manifests itself in specifically dreams and neurotic symptoms. In Jones's view, words, emblems, tokens, badges, and conventional gestures are not true symbols, and are only loosely and vaguely called symbols by those ignorant of psychoanalysis. True symbols, in the strict psychoanalytical sense, being those which represent ideas, feelings, and wishes that have been repressed. Only what is repressed is symbolized. Only what is repressed needs to be symbolized. The repressed ideas requiring symbolization being ideas of the self and of the immediate blood relatives, or of the phenomena of birth, love, and death. In other words, they represent the most primitive ideas and interests imaginable. The classic psychoanalytical view of symbolism as something qualitatively different from the imagery and metaphor used in waking life derives from and is part and parcel of Freud's theory that dreaming is not simply the mind's activity while asleep, but is a specific device by which repressed wishes can be granted hallucinatory fulfillment in disguised form, without the dreamer becoming aware of the nature of the wish being fulfilled. So that, for instance, a dreamer can dream of mounting stairs without becoming aware that he wished to have sexual intercourse. According to this view, all dreams express repressed wishes and ideas. All interpretations of dreams are formulations of the repressed primitive wish. And all images occurring in dreams are representations of one or other of the most primitive ideas and interests imaginable. In view of the fact that it has become widely believed that Freud maintained that dreams are sexual and that the images occurring in them are frequently, if not usually, symbols of sexual organs and activities, I begin this section by citing what Freud did in fact say on the matter. The relevant quotations come from his 10th introductory lecture in 1916. The range of things which are given symbolic representations in dreams is not wide. The human body as a whole, parents, children, brothers and sisters, birth, death, nakedness, and something else besides, this something else besides turns out to be the field of sexual life, the genitals, sexual processes, sexual intercourse. The great majority of symbols in dreams are sexual symbols, and here a strange disproportion is revealed. The topics I've mentioned are few, but the symbols for them are extremely numerous. Freud then goes on to list over 30 symbols for the male genitals and over 20 for the female. Reading these quotations, and indeed the whole lecture from which they're taken, one is left with the overwhelming impression that in Freud's view, dream symbolism is predominantly sexual. There are, however, two logical errors in his argument. The first is category error, that of comparing items that are of different logical type and levels of abstraction. His statement, and here a strange disproportion is revealed, the topics I've mentioned are few, but the symbols for them are extremely numerous, ignores the fact that the topics he designates few and the symbols he designates numerous are of different logical type and cannot therefore be compared numerically with one another. The topics birth, death, the field of sexual life are general categories arrived at by abstraction. But the symbols, umbrellas, revolvers, balloons, cupboards, apples, etc., refer to specific objects. It is therefore hardly surprising that there are more symbols than topics symbolized, since the entities classified must of necessity be more numerous than the classes into which they are classified, and the strange disproportion between topics and symbols, which Freud believed the study of dreams revealed. Freud's second logical error consists in asserting first that the range of things which are given symbolic representation in dreams is not wide, when in fact the list of things which he says are symbolized in dreams, the body, parents, siblings, children, birth, death, nakedness, and sex, covers an extremely wide range of human experience, almost everything indeed apart from work, play, and intellectual activity. And then, secondly, going on to treat the field of sexual life as though it were something else besides, and in a different category to the other members of his list, when in fact it has intimate connections with them all. We only have a body because our parents once had sexual intercourse. We only have brothers and sisters because our parents had sexual intercourse more than once. We only have children because we have had sexual intercourse. Birth and death are the first and last members of the series birth, copulation, and death. And nakedness has obvious connections with birth, sex, and parenthood. Here again, Freud has committed a category error, that of detaching sex from the other members of his list and putting it into a class of its own. If, however, one refuses to follow Freud in his categorization of sex as something else besides, it becomes possible to reformulate his statement about the range of things that are given symbolic representation in dreams in more general, inclusive terms, without in any way reducing the force and significance of what he is saying. It becomes possible to say that the range of things symbolized in dreams embraces all aspects of man's life cycle, and that the study of dreams reveals that human beings are more preoccupied with their biological destiny than most of them realize. Freud's idea that the great majority of symbols in dreams are sexual loses even more of its strangeness if one assumes that dreamers use sexual symbols not just to refer generally to sexual organs and processes, but to formulate specific thoughts about them, and that therefore the wide range of images that may be used to refer to sexual processes is a measure of the wide range of thoughts, reflections, puzzlements, expectations, disappointments, satisfactions, and dissatisfactions about sexual matters that may be expressed in dreams. If a dreamer is trying to express something about the relationship between male potency and protectiveness, he or she might use an umbrella or an overcoat as a phallic symbol. But if he, or again she, wanted to say something about the ease with which male pride can be deflated, a balloon might present itself as an apter symbol. Just as in speech, in dreams, the image chosen to represent a sexual or indeed any other idea depends on the precise nuance of what the dreamer is trying to express. What is involved is not a thesaurus-like list of symbols which the dreamer has available for representing ideas of birth, love, and death, but a capacity to detect and use similarities between objects and processes he has perceived in the outside world and his own body, and its processes to construct metaphors with which to express thoughts about his biological destiny. And since the dreamer is communicating with himself and not with others, he does not have to confine himself to metaphors, which would be comprehensible to others and are compatible with the social conventions. And he may therefore use metaphors which would be ludicrous, bizarre, incongruous, or offensive if used in waking speech. Body symbolism. Sexual symbols can usefully be regarded as a subclass of body symbols, that is, images appearing in dreams which derive their meaning from the fact that the mind can perceive similarities between its own body and its actions on the one hand, and objects and activities occurring in the outside world on the other. As Marion Milner, in particular, has pointed out, there seems to be a general innate tendency to apprehend all objects that are not oneself by likening them to organs and processes which are oneself, a tendency which enables us to assimilate the originally alien outside world into the inevitably and primordially familiar world of one's own body and its sensations, and which provides us with a stock of images which we can liken to our bodies and its processes, and to which our bodies can be likened. As a result, body images or symbols are available for making metaphorical statements about the outside world, and for describing in concrete imagery mental processes and images derived from the outside world, are available for making metaphorical statements about our bodily and mental processes. Our mental processes would indeed be ineffable if we could not describe them in metaphors derived either from our bodies or the outside world. The use of body metaphor, or symbolism, is not, of course, confined to dreams. Waking language allows us to endow countless objects with heads, necks, eyes, arms, hands, fingers, nails, trunks, waists, breasts, legs, feet, and so on, and to conceive of winds whistling, cannons roaring, chasms yawning, rivers running, brooks babbling. It is in fact full of metaphors, which must have arisen and survived because of the ease with which the human mind can liken non-human objects to the human body. In dreams, however, the two facts that the dreamer is not confined by the properties and conventions of waking language, and that he is likely to be preoccupied with, I have called earlier his biological destiny, facilitate and encourage the use of body symbolism in ways that would be disconcerting in waking language. First, a patient in analysis dreamt that he gave his analyst a lift in his car, which turned immediately into a motorcycle. A moment later, he was carrying his analyst on his back, and then a moment after that, he was walking along with his analyst inside his testicles. It's evident that this man can conceive of a resemblance between a car, a motorcycle, himself walking, and his testicles, since he successfully puts his analyst in or on all of them. And since he had entered analysis because he was sexually impotent, it is less than fanciful to assume that the resemblance between them consists in their power, borrowed in the case of the car, still borrowed but held between the legs in the case of the motorcycle, actual but general in the case of himself walking, actual and specifically sexual in the case of his testicles. So in constructing this dream, he has used two images from the outside world, cars and motorcycles, to symbolize the bodily power he knows he has and cannot use, and two images from his own body, himself walking and his testicles, to symbolize where this power should properly be located, and where, if he can take in from his analyst what he wants to get from him, it will be located. Those who have followed me so far will appreciate how difficult it would be to use the imagery this patient has selected to construct a discursive verbal statement that did justice to the hopes and fears expressed in this dream. According to Freud, and indeed Jung too, birth is one of the range of things which are given symbolic representation in dreams, and emergence from water is commonly cited as a typical symbol of birth. This seems to be correct. Dreams of someone emerging from a sea or lake or from a ship or a bus are common and often readily interpretable as being concerned with birth, the birth in question being either a literal one, the dreamer's own, his siblings, those of his actual or hoped-for children, etc., or a metaphorical one, the publication of the book he is writing, the film he has made, the rebirth he is hoping to achieve during treatment. Dreams in which a child is actually being born are not uncommon, and in women's dreams, both the baby and the mother may represent aspects of the dreamer's personality, the baby standing for either the new and better self she hopes will emerge, or the worse self she fears will. Such dreams are common during psychotherapy, presumably because a psychotherapist's relation to his patient can readily be likened to that of a midwife to a mother in labor. Birth, then, is one of the aspects of man's life cycle, which may be represented symbolically in dreams, and also a bodily process, which may itself be used to symbolize non-biological creative processes. Since symbolic descriptions of birth are common in myths and metaphors derived from birth, are common in everyday language. It is to be doubted whether the symbolization of birth and the use of birth as a symbol in waking and dream life are all that different. Automobile symbolism. Automobiles feature frequently in dreams, and their meaning is not exhausted by referring to the fact that they are powerful machines, rather obviously capable of being used as phallic symbols. If an automobile appears in a dream, its meaning will depend on whether it belongs to the dreamer, or his father, or his mother, or someone else, on whether the dreamer is driving it himself, or is a passenger, on who is sitting beside or behind the dreamer, or whether it is closed, open, or a convertible, a family or sports car, new, old, veteran or vintage, home manufactured or foreign, and on what specific features of it are mentioned by the dreamer. Difficulties with the steering suggest anxiety about self-control. With the headlights or windscreen wipers suggest problems about insight and knowing where one is going. Dreams of running out of gas suggest fears about lacking energy or resources. A dream of punctures suggests fears of being deflated. I suspect that the relationship between a driver and his automobile has replaced the Platonic image of the rider and his horse as the most apt and most used metaphor for expressing the great variety of relationships that can exist between a person and his passions. Modern man is more likely to dream of being at the wheel of his car, which he may or may not be able to control in traffic or in the open road, than of having the reins of his horse in his hands or of spurring it on to further achievements. The fact that cars are designed to have more than one occupant makes automobile symbolism available for expressing ideas about the dreamer's relationship to those internalized figures who may be experienced or disapproving or encouraging. They can be represented as backseat drivers or helpful navigators. Automobiles often appear in dreams as sources of borrowed or stolen energy. In other words, they often seem to represent the idea of a potency which has been acquired inauthentically. The dreamer arrogating to himself potency, which in fact belongs to the car or its owner or its manufacturer, so that he appears to be being active and dynamic when in fact he is being passive. Animal symbolism. According to Calvin Hall, who has collected thousands of dreams dreamt by hundreds of normal Americans, domesticated animals appear more frequently in dreams than wild animals do. And the three most dreamt about domestic animals are horses, dogs, and cats, in that order. He also states that women dream of horses twice as often as men do. The horse is, he says, a pristine symbol of wild, lawless, licentious animal passion. He nonetheless lists it as a domesticated animal. He also says that the horse usually signifies masculine sexuality, since he is a large, powerful creature of great vitality and alarming impulsiveness. Power, vitality, and impulsiveness must have been distributed differently between the sexes in classical times. Regrettably, Hall fails to offer comparable interpretations for dogs and cats appearing in dreams. According to Freud, wild animals mean people in an excited sensual state, and further, evil instincts or passions. And small animals and vermin mean children and brothers and sisters. If, however, one keeps it clearly in mind that neither animals nor any other category of things or creatures actually appear in dreams, but that, on the contrary, dreamers use images of objects with which to make metaphorical statements about themselves, it becomes obvious that listing standard meanings of objects appearing in dreams is a pointless, methodologically unsound activity. The question is not what do, say, animals mean when they appear in dreams, but what imagery does any particular dreamer have available for constructing his dreams, and what determines the aptness of imagery to express particular ideas in dreams. Using animals as an example, any particular dreamer has available for constructing metaphor imagery of all those particular animals he has known personally, as pets, as farm animals, as sporting animals, on which he has ridden or placed money, all wild or domesticated animals with which he is familiar, all animals he has read about and seen pictures of, all animals featured in legends and myths with which he is familiar, all animals featuring in the Proverbs, catchphrases and dead metaphors of the languages he uses. So if someone dreams of a lion, it may be the actual lion of which, as a zookeeper, he has custody. It may be the image of lions he has acquired from books, films, visits to zoos, or time spent in a part of the world where there really are lions. It may be an heraldic lion, or it may be the lion that features in clichés as proud and roaring, but whose tail can be twisted. Dreams using imagery connected with clothes are common. The dreamer may be dressing, may be in a state of indecision as to which pair of stockings, which tie, which suit to put on, or he may be embarrassed to discover that he or she is inappropriately or immodestly dressed, or is the only person to be undressed in a setting where everyone else is dressed, or vice versa. The metaphorical possibilities of clothes derive from the ambiguous roles they play in personal and social relationships. First, they cover nakedness, but maybe their line, cut, or function draw attention to what they conceal. As a result, dreams about trousers, skirts, may represent thoughts about genitals and breasts and reflections about maleness, femaleness, motherliness, and seductiveness, etc. Secondly, clothes transform their wearers from the body they nakedly and naively are into the persona they present to the world. As a result, dreams about putting on clothes may represent thoughts about the authenticity or otherwise of the front the dreamer presents to the world, and the relationship between his private and public selves. Dreams of putting on clothes belonging to someone else, or wearing a uniform to which one is not entitled, suggest self-accusations of plagiarism and pretentiousness, including in the case of dreams of wearing clothes conventionally worn only by the other sex, sexual pretentiousness, i.e. laying claims to attributes believed to be the preserve of the other sex. Thirdly, clothes can create illusory changes in the wearer's appearance, making him or her look taller, shorter, thinner, or fatter, younger or older, cleaner or dirtier than he or she really is. As a result, clothes imagery can be used in dreams to express self-accusations of hypocrisy, of deceiving others about one's age or youth, of passing oneself off as more or less desirable or available or vigorous than one really feels oneself to be, presenting oneself to a world as a sheep when one really feels oneself to be a wolf, or as a wolf when one really feels like a sheep. Fourthly, clothes are status symbols and may denote the status one has or lacks or aspires or claims to have by reason of one's income level, social class, age, or sex. As a result, dreams in which the dreamer wears clothes which are, in his own view, inappropriate to his actual status, in which he presents himself as possessing more or less status and deserving of more or less deference than he in fact feels himself entitled to, may represent conflicts between feelings of superiority and inferiority. Some examples: a professional woman arrived at work wearing only a dressing gown. She borrowed a blouse and a skirt from colleagues, but refused the offer of underwear, protesting that her clients did not need to know anything of her private life. An advertising agent fell asleep at work after attending a business lunch and dreamt that his suit was covered with spots. A woman dreamt that she was at a cocktail party wearing a low-cut dress and her penises popped out. Dreams in which the dreamer is traveling towards some destination, encountering obstacles on his way, are common. They can usually be interpreted allegorically, the journey being the dreamer's life, the destination being either lovers' meeting or death or arrival at whatever position in life signifies to the dreamer fulfillment, and the obstacles encountered representing the psychological and social obstacles with which the dreamer is contending. Anxious travel dreams often represent fears of missing opportunities, since buses, trains, and planes may be missed and barriers may be closed, just as the train or plane is leaving. When the destination is named, it is more likely to derive its significance from its place in myth, folklore, and catchphrases than from any actual role it may play in the dreamer's life. As a result, westward journeys are towards aging and death. Journeys to Rome hinge on the fact that all roads lead to it and refer to thoughts about love or death. Journeys to Naples allude to the catchphrase, "See Naples and die." Dreams of traveling by taxi or underground are not uncommonly dreamt by patients in analysis, the former because taxis charge by time spent on the journey as well as by the distance traveled, and because although the passenger decides for the destination, it is the taxi driver that drives. The latter because analysis is readily likened to a journey underground at the end of which the patient will hopefully surface and see daylight again. The trunks, suitcases, bags carried by dream travelers represent either the impedimenta they carry with them through life, the burdens of guilt, or the assets and treasures without which arrival at their destination must be clung to at all costs. And since on the last journey we can't take anything with us, dreams about dying may concern themselves with holding on to or letting go of luggage. Houses in dreams seem to be used to represent the dreamer's body, his mind, his mother's body in which he once lived, and more rarely his father's family. It is not difficult to see why houses can represent bodies. They have fronts and backs, front and back doors, and often front and back passages. Eyes can readily be likened to windows. Bay windows and balconies may be curved like breasts, and food comes into them, is consumed inside them, and the waste products leave through pipes or have to be deposited in dustbins. Their capacity to represent the mind seems to depend on their consisting of compartments, stories, and rooms with differing functions, which are at one and the same time connected and separated by stairs and doors. They are therefore apt images for the mind or personality conceived of as consisting of various functions or faculties, which should be connected to one another to form one integrated building, but which in fact all too often are not. Hence dreams in which doors are kept locked or previously unknown rooms are discovered or walls have been removed. Furthermore, the contents of houses comprise relics of the biographies of the occupiers, and so the furnishings of a house may represent the dreamer's memories, the experience or learning with which he has furnished his mind, or the junk with which he has cluttered it. An historic example of house imagery being used to represent the dreamer's mind is provided by the dream Jung had in 1909, which led him to formulate the concept of a collective unconscious. He was in a house which was unfamiliar, but was nonetheless his house. After exploring 2 of its floors, he discovered a heavy door, which opened onto a staircase leading down to a cellar, a beautifully vaulted room, which looked exceedingly ancient, and beneath which another staircase led to a cave full of scattered bones and pottery, including 2 skulls. It was evident to Jung that the house represented his own psyche, that the ground floor stood for the first level of the unconscious, and the cellar and cave for the world of primitive man within myself. Freud, with whom Jung was traveling at the time and to whom he told the dream, sought to interpret it quite otherwise in terms of concealed death wishes towards, perhaps, his wife. Since we would have no biological destinies if we starved, and in health eating is a powerful appetite at all ages, images of food appear frequently in dreams just as they do in waking thought, and just as metaphors derived from food and eating occur frequently in language. Sometimes these images do in fact refer to food, as may happen when people are hungry, but more often they are metaphors or symbols referring to either the sense of being protected, welcomed, and cherished, associated with being provided with food, or with the sense of giving, welcoming, and nurturing, associated with feeding others. Or they may refer, as in waking speech, to other appetites, notably the sexual or to ritual, ceremonial, and religious connotations of food. It is, I think, probably true that people who are, in psychoanalytical terminology, oral characters dream more frequently of food than do others. These seem to divide into 2 groups, those who wish to be fed and those who wish to feed others. Those whose abiding predominant wish is to be fed are those who have sought to avoid the anxiety attendant on growing up into the world by hankering after infancy and early childhood, when they really were, they fondly imagine, protected from all dangers by a loving mother who fed them. Such people display the same hankering in their waking life. They prefer soft foods to hard foods, sweet foods to sour foods, white meat to red meat, homely foods to outlandish ones, sweet wines to dry wines. They require frequent breaks in their work to restore themselves with sweets or confectionery. In England, Mars bars are a favorite or a nice cup of tea. And go to bed with hot Horlicks malted milk to fend off night starvation. Years ago, I had a patient whose spirits always lifted when she saw an advertisement for Benger's food, for she had been a Benger's baby, a fact of which her mother, for some reason, was inordinately proud. In children, this use of food to provide consolation, comfort, and reassurance that they still really are the center of their mother's world passes unchallenged, and images of food occur frequently in their dreams. But in adult life, it forms part of an elaborate self-deception with which others often collude to pretend that life is entirely cozy and safe, that violence, passion, and uncertainty do not exist, that Big Mother is still watching protectively over them. Various types of dreams. Traumatic dreams occur after traumatic experiences, i.e., after totally unexpected, shocking experiences, such as being involved in an earthquake, a train or plane crash, being bombed, mugged, raped, or being anesthetized without warning or preparation, as occurs to children who are not forewarned by their parents or doctors as to what is going to be done to them. The essence of a traumatic experience is, in fact, that it is a sudden, unexpected, unenvisaged, terrifying event in which the subject is a passive victim and in no way an active, participating agent. Traumatic dreams consist of more or less accurate repetitions of the preceding traumatic experience. They become less frequent and intense as time passes, unless there are psychological or financial advantages attached to continuing to have them, or unless the traumatic event resembled some pre-existing fear of the victim, as might happen if someone with a neurotic fear of traveling really did get involved in a train or plane crash, in which case the traumatic event would be experienced as a nightmare come true. Traumatic dreams differ from other dreams in not being susceptible to interpretation, since the traumatic events they repetitiously reproduce are invasions and intrusions upon the victim's psychological continuity, and are in no sense creations of his own imagination or envisaged consequences of his actions. They have, however, unlike most other dreams, an obvious cause, viz., the preceding traumatic event, and a common-sense explanation that they are attempts, eventually successful, to assimilate an initially unassimilable experience, to convert an unimaginable event that has nonetheless happened into a memory. Originally, the word nightmare referred specifically to a terrifying, paralyzing dream of being oppressed and overpowered by a fiend or mare, monster, incubus or succubus. An incubus being an evil spirit or demon supposed to descend upon persons in their sleep, and especially to seek carnal intercourse with women, and a succubus being a demon in a female form, supposed to have carnal intercourse with men in their sleep. Both definitions from the shorter Oxford English Dictionary. But nowadays, it is used more loosely to refer to any frightening dream from which the sleeper has difficulty in arousing himself. In view of the fact that nightmares still occupy a place in folklore, and that many otherwise well-informed people believe they are common, it must be stated that this seems not to be so. According to Hartman, true incubus nightmares have only very rarely been reported by subjects sleeping under laboratory conditions, and very frightening dreams are not quite so rare, while Folks reports that children chosen at random, i.e. without reference to their psychiatric state, talk as though they expect that the dreams they will have in the dream laboratory will be frightening, scary, but that in fact they're not. Frightening dreams have, however, been frequently reported by addicts who have spent nights in dream laboratories during withdrawal from barbiturates, amphetamines, and alcohol. Ernest Jones, in his classic On the Nightmare, which was written in 1909 but first published in English in 1931, is also of the opinion that nightmares are rarer than most writers on the subject have assumed, although he makes no attempt to estimate their frequency and defines them in such a way as to exclude many equally distressing dreams. According to Jones, true nightmares have three cardinal features: agonizing dread, a sense of oppression, and weight upon the chest, leading to difficulty in breathing, and a conviction of helpless paralysis. He states categorically that such dreams are morbid phenomena, which never occur in healthy people, and that they have a specific pathology, being an expression of a violent conflict between a certain unconscious sexual desire and intense fear. The certain unconscious desire being, in both sexes, the feminine or masochistic component of the sexual instinct. In other words, true or incubus nightmares only occur in men who are totally unaware of their passive homosexual inclinations and would be horrified to discover that they had any, and in women who would be equally horrified to discover that they had heterosexual inclinations. Not surprisingly, Jones takes the view that nightmares are more severe, possibly more frequent in men than in women. It's interesting to note that although Jones refers to his own experience, he never once cites a dream of his own or one of his patients, and that most of those dreams he does quote were dreamt in the 18th century or earlier. Although this may perhaps be due to his having been inhibited by problems of professional discretion, which in view of the date of writing and the homosexual implications of his thesis must have been more daunting than they are today. It also raises the question as to whether nightmares are culture pattern dreams, whether or not nightmares were commoner in the past than they are now, and whether they occur in cultures, and today perhaps in subcultures, in which sons have powerful reasons for being submissive towards their fathers, daughters have powerful reasons for repudiating their sexual feelings, and the prevailing ideology makes it possible to attribute one's own sexual feelings to demons. Although classical incubus nightmares and even very frightening dreams seem to be rarer than is popularly supposed, dreams which are accompanied by anxiety are common and are probably within everyone's experience. In an earlier book, Anxiety and Neurosis, I argued that anxiety is not, properly speaking, a form of fear, as much contemporary psychiatric thinking assumes, but of vigilance. Vigilance being that state of subliminal alertness with which we continuously scan our environment to ensure that we notice significant changes within it and can adapt to them by appropriate action. According to this view, fear is the emotion evoked by the appearance within our environment of something known to be threatening and dangerous, while anxiety is the emotion evoked by the appearance within it of something unfamiliar and strange, something which seems to demand a response, but to which we do not yet know what the response should be. One of the reasons why fear and anxiety are so easily confused is that treating a strange object as though it were ipso facto dangerous is a seemingly appropriate response to it. But although many animals and human beings habitually do flee from strange objects, others display curiosity, exploring it to discover whether it is in fact dangerous or whether, on the contrary, it can be eaten, played with, or safely ignored. Domestic cats confronted with the noise of hoovers or washing machines, or with other pets and small children meeting other children for the first time, display anxiety, which may or may not turn into fear. Anxiety, then, is a state of mind in which we are poised for action, but do not yet know how we should act. And we all experience it when a danger, a problem, a test situation, or an opportunity has been encountered, but its precise nature is not yet known. When we do not yet know what questions we shall have to answer in an examination, what kind of audience we are going to face when we appear on stage or give a lecture, whom we are going to meet at a gathering of strangers, what diagnosis and prognosis we will receive when we, or someone close to us, fall ill, how we shall manage if separated from familiar protecting figures and are compelled to fend for ourselves. The last instance of anxiety has been honored with a special name, separation anxiety, since it is, in a sense, the opposite of other forms of anxiety, being evoked by the prospect of the disappearance of familiar objects, rather than by the appearance of unfamiliar ones, and plays an important role in the production of neurotic anxiety. Neurotic anxiety being anxiety provoked by objects and situations which seem to give no grounds for it. Oedipal dreams. According to Calvin Hall, the dramatis persona of 85% of dreams consists of 3 persons: the dreamer, and one man and one woman, and the theme of such threesome dreams is usually jealousy. The other man or woman is not infrequently the dreamer's father or mother, and is frequently an older man or woman. His collection of dreams includes several in which incest occurs, and many more in which the dreamer himself notices the resemblance of the desired figure to his own parent, or in which the figures of parents and spouses, lovers, or fiancés are condensed. Not surprisingly, Calvin Hall claims that by studying the dreams of normal people, he has verified what Freud discovered during the treatment of emotionally disturbed patients. The frequent occurrence of Oedipal dreams supports not only Freud's formulations about the Oedipus complex, but also the wider idea that throughout life we are preoccupied with our biological destiny, and that our parents' relationships with one another, with ourselves and their own descendants, constitute an important part of that destiny. Convenience dreams. These are dreams in which the dreamer imagines that he is actually doing what he will, in fact, shortly have to wake up to do, in which, for instance, he dreams that he gets out of bed to pass water when he has in fact got a full bladder. Such dreams fit very nicely into Freud's hallucinatory wish fulfillment theory of dreams, since they represent, as enacted, a wish of the dreamer, and if full bladders could be emptied by dreaming of doing so, they would enable the dreamer to go on sleeping. Sexual dreams accompanied by orgasm are sometimes regarded as convenience dreams, the underlying assumption being that the need for orgasm is determined rather simply by tension within the genital organs that demands discharge. Dreams in which the dreamer wakes up, dresses, goes to work, etc., can also be regarded as convenience dreams, but they may raise questions about the dreamer's reasons for wishing to remain asleep rather than wake up. Questions about the value the person puts on sleep and the reasons for his disinclination to resume waking life again. Orgastic dreams. Almost all men have had dreams which culminate in orgasm and ejaculation, and in adolescence they're common. The imagery of such dreams is neither overtly sexual or symbolic, and the same dreamer may use either type of imagery, a fact which is a powerful argument against the Freudian assumption that the function of symbolization in dreams is to disguise the nature of the wish expressed in the dream. According to Kinsey, the sexual dreams of inexperienced women are essentially romantic, but occasional dreams to the point of orgasm occur in a considerable proportion of mature females. The implication of such observations is that orgastic dreams are simply the result of sexual tension demanding relief, and that women are more dependent on sexual experience than men for discovering how to relieve tension by autistic hallucination during sleep. I find myself skeptical of both propositions, and the following quotation from Oswald shows that the tension is not where it is properly supposed to be located. Men whose spinal cords have been shattered through injury, so that there is no longer any nervous connection between their brains and their lower bodies, still have sexual dreams in which they experience all the feelings and sensations of orgasm. The basis of this experience is not in their isolated lower bodies. It is wholly within their brains. Ejaculations and orgasms can occur during sleep without any accompanying remembered dream, or accompanied by the conviction that there was no accompanying dream. The emotion and feeling tone during orgastic dreams is not always erotic, but may be angry or anxious, and the imagery, whether overtly sexual or symbolic, often does not represent a sexual act, as it would if orgastic dreams were simple hallucinatory wish fulfillments. It would seem, therefore, that dreams accompanying orgasm may represent not so much fulfillment of the sexual wish as thoughts about sex and its role in the dreamer's life, instigated by the impending orgasm. Not surprisingly, women dream about menstruation, hopes and fears about pregnancy, fertility, sterility, and aging, and in both sexes, ideas about the repulsiveness, unattractiveness, and dangerousness of female bodies, the flow of blood being interpretable as either a sign of life and continued fertility, or as an indication of injury. There seem to be wide and irreconcilable discrepancies of opinion about children's dreams. On the one hand, Calvin Hall, who collects dreams of persons not in therapy, thinks that what little knowledge we have of children's dreams suggests that their dreams are much more complex and much more dreadful than has previously been thought. And Neubauer, who is a child psychiatrist and analyst, says that children of 2 tend to dream of being bitten or chased. The children of 4 tend to dream of animals and of good and bad people who either protect or attack them, and that children of 5 or 6 dream of being killed or injured and of seeing ghosts. On the other hand, Freud and Ernest Jones both thought that children's dreams are simple, sensible, and intelligible, logical and ordinate, and easy to recognize as the imaginary fulfillment of an ungratified wish. And Fawkes, who collected children's dreams under laboratory conditions, states first that dreams of the child are generally realistically related to his waking life, and second, they become relatively more bizarre and unpleasant for children with some dysfunction in waking personality. They also, as already mentioned earlier, report that their subjects talked as though they expected their dreams to be scary, but that the dreams they actually reported in the laboratory were not. Children's reports of their dreams should, I think, be treated for a variety of reasons with some circumspection. First, children are still engaged in learning how to categorize their experiences and in discovering what the words they hear adults using really mean. In other words, they are still exploring the imaginative network constituted by language and learning, which words evoke what images and emotions in the adult world they are growing up into, and which connections that seem obvious to them they must learn to ignore. As a result, their use of the words dream and nightmare will be affected by their need to discover what these two words mean, what distinction adults have in mind when they choose to use one and not the other, and why adults react to one with curiosity or incuriosity, and to the other with, perhaps, concern. When talking to grown-ups, children are not talking to equals, but to people whom they are dependent and who are more powerful than themselves. As a result, children may tell grown-ups what they think they want to hear, what they think will impress them, or what they think will worry them. For instance, if a child announces that it has been having nightmares, this may not mean that it has just started having distressing dreams, but that it has just encountered the word and appreciated that it is a more dramatic word than dream, and is more likely to create alarm and despondency in its parents. Also, having a bad dream may in some families become a legitimized reason for a child calling its mother at night or for getting into bed with its parents, justifying nocturnal visits, which, although frowned upon by those experts who create public opinion, the parents as well as the child may enjoy. Also, in a culture like ours, which does not take dreams or the imagination seriously, or if it does so self-consciously, the motives for any adult other than the mother listening to a child's dreams are complex, to say the least, and children must, it seems to me, feel that something peculiar and bewildering is going on if they are asked to tell their dreams to a child psychiatrist at a clinic, to a psychologist in a dream laboratory, or to an aunt who is a psychoanalyst. Dreams of the alienated. I shall now describe a number of types of dreams dreamt by people who are out of touch with themselves and who are engaged in one or another of the maneuvers open to people so placed, or rather unplaced, looking for themselves the quest for an identity that was so fashionable in the 1950s and 1960s, trying to pass off a false self as a real one, resisting the incursions of their real selves, recapturing the state of affairs that existed prior to their original discovery of themselves as separate entities, and adopting an ironical or despairing stance of acceptance of their alienation. The typical or prototypical dream of a person who is looking for himself is that of being naked, is that of being asked by some stranger who he is, failing to find an answer or giving some answer that is puzzling or ambiguous. For instance, a woman dreamt that a policeman asked her to show him her identity card, and when she did so, she was embarrassed to discover that it gave her name as Hysteria. Another woman, a doctor, dreamt that she was looking for her own case history and found it in a sealed envelope at the bottom of a pile of professional papers. An example of a dream of a person who is trying to pass off a false self as a real one was provided by a young man who had good grounds for supposing that he was the only bearer of his surname, which sounded rather distinguished. He dreamt that the butler of a fictitious duke told him, rather snootily, that his surname was not one with which his grace was familiar. He awoke with a retort on his lips that there must be many surnames in the world with which the Duke had yet to acquaint himself. The impossible architectural dreams of the American, who passed himself off as more English than the English, belong in the same group. People who devote themselves to resisting the incursion of their real selves not uncommonly dream of impending catastrophes, of countries just about to be overrun by invading armies, of air raids, of nuclear missiles which fail to reach their target, of Martian spaceships on course towards the Earth. Similar delusions preoccupy the waking thoughts of schizophrenics, who explore the furthest reaches of alienation, but rarely return to tell their tale. Very rarely, people may dream that the catastrophe has occurred, that the world is devastated, the sedge is withered, and the birds have ceased to sing. These dreams seem to occur in people who have concealed their alienation beneath a cloak of illusions, and have then suffered extreme and sudden disillusionment. A literary example of such a dream is provided by Leopardi's poem Terror by Night, which describes a dream which apparently he really did have, in which the moon falls out of sky and burns itself out in a field. Leopardi, who accordingly to one of his biographers, committed to his notebook one of the most terrible indictments ever penned by a son against his mother, had this dream during the year in which he suddenly lost his religious faith, suffered from temporary blindness, and felt, he said, like a living corpse. I have discussed this dream in another, dreamt many years ago, by a patient of mine, of the moon falling out of the sky into a dustbin in a paper entitled On Idealization, Illusion, and Catastrophic Disillusion. Dreams expressing wishes to abrogate alienation by recapturing the sense of oneness with the world and the mother are common, at any rate among people who enter psychotherapy. One kind of dream in this category is of particular interest, and these are dreams which appear to be projected onto a screen or backcloth, or in which the dream consists of a white or blank screen on which nothing is projected. Such dreams led the American analyst Lewin to postulate that all dreams are projected onto a dream screen, which is only occasionally visible, and to interpret the screen as a symbol of both sleep and the maternal breast. Dreams of the blind. The blind dream, but if they have never been sighted, their dreams lack visual imagery. Those who have lost their sight use visual imagery in their dreams if they can still picture things in their mind's eye while awake. 3 men who had been blind for 3, 10, and 15 years respectively all reported that they still saw things in their dreams, but 2 others who had been blind for 30 and 40 years reported that they no longer did. The former 3 all had rapid eye movements while dreaming, while the latter 2 did not. And these observations suggest that dreaming is not essentially a visual activity, even though to the sighted it appears to be, and support the idea that dreaming is imaginative activity as it manifests itself in sleep. The images used by imagination being of necessity those made available to it by sensation and memory. Punning dreams. Dreams which exploit the fact that words may have more than one meaning, or that words with the same sound may have different meanings, are not uncommon. Freud cites a dream in which the dreamer was being kissed in an automobile. He went on at once to give me the interpretation which I myself would never have guessed, namely that it meant autoeroticism. Ella Sharp quotes a patient who dreamt Iona Cathedral, and another who dreamt of a courtyard, and then went on to describe how she had got caught in an enclosed garden and had to climb out over a spiked wall. As Ella Sharp points out, this dream expresses anxiety about courting. After suffering a fracture of the penis, not as disastrous an event as it sounds, a patient of mine dreamt that a potted cyclamen fell to the ground, broke, and then burst into flower. The man was not emasculated, but flourishing. The plunning possibilities of place names are often exploited in dreams. Bournemouth may be the mother's genitals, since it is the mouth from which one was born, or it may be death, which is that bourne from which no traveler returns. Abyssinia may be visited in a dream, its attraction being that it is an abyss of sin. In pre-permissive days, when virginity was still prized, male dreamers sometimes went to Maidenhead. Punning dreams are of some slight theoretical interest for three reasons. First, they reveal, as waking puns do too, the existence of phonetic connections between ideas and images which can cut across their rational, logical connections. Reason and education insist that words have a prescribed meaning and that trains of thought should not jump across from one track to another. There is, as a result, something mildly submersive about punning, which cocks a snook at the established order of thought by bringing together momentary meanings which reason says should be apart. Examination dreams. Dreams in which the dreamer is about to sit an examination which he in fact took years ago are not uncommon. They almost always invoke an examination which the dreamer in fact passed and can therefore be interpreted as self-reassuring. If, despite the anxiety you felt then, you passed the test, you can pass the forthcoming one. Examination dreams may also hinge on the fact that in modern society, examinations for the professional classes, at least, are rites de passage. Examination dreams may also hinge on the fact that in modern society, examinations for the professional classes, at least, are rites of passage by which people pass from student to adult status. As a result, people who, for whatever reason, do not feel they have grown up, despite having passed the appropriate examinations, may recurrently dream that they still have to take the examination that they have in fact taken and passed. Dreams of taking, passing, or failing driving tests can be similarly interpreted. Physical illness in dreams. Both Aristotle and Hippocrates believed in the existence of prodromal dreams, occurring just before a physical illness declared itself, and explained them by asserting that dreams could magnify sensations so that, for instance, a bladder disease might be heralded by a dream of springs, or lung disease by a dream of being suffocated. This idea survived until the rise of scientific medicine, and does not strike contemporary analysts and dream laboratory workers as absurd, though I know of no convincing instance of an analyst having diagnosed a physical illness solely by means of dream interpretation. Ella Sharp reported the following dream of a woman who was continuing to work despite extreme lassitude. She was clinging with all her might to a window ledge, and then finally exhausted, she fell to the ground. 2 days later, she fainted and was found to be suffering from a long-standing bladder infection. To my mind, this dream is better interpreted as a warning to stop driving herself too hard and as a wish to give up doing so than as an indication that she knew that she was physically ill. The text of the dream contains nothing that could be interpreted as evidence of unconscious knowledge of her bladder infection. Ella Sharp also quotes an impressive dream dreamt by an 81-year-old woman 3 days before her death. I saw all my sicknesses gathered together, and as I looked, they were no longer sicknesses, but roses. And I knew the roses would be planted, and that they would grow. Imperative dreams. Dreams in which the dreamer is commanded or exhorted by a voice, usually not his own, are common. By far the commonest dream, command or exhortation, is wake up, but the call may be professional or absurd, i.e., catalog this, please, dreamt by a librarian. Go and find Maria Athenas. Fetch the squigger. Although dreams of being woken up by a voice saying, wake up, lend themselves to an obvious common sense interpretation, it is my impression that they only occur in people who are withdrawn and introverted and do indeed need to wake up, metaphorically speaking, to the world around them, and in sleeping beauties who are waiting for someone to awaken them. Sleep and the physiology of dreams. All mammals, birds, and reptiles sleep, and it must presumably have beneficial effects which outweigh such disadvantages as the fact that during it, vigilance is reduced and vulnerability to attack is increased. It seems to be generally assumed that among the higher mammals at least, the brain is the organ which requires sleep most. As a result, most research on sleep concentrates on the changes in the activity of the brain that occur during it. In 1953, Aserinsky and Kleitman discovered that sleep consisted of two qualitatively distinct phases, during one of which people dream, and during the other of which they do not. And since then, an enormous amount of research on the physiology of sleep and dreams has been conducted, mostly in the United States. However, all researchers into the electrophysiology of sleep seem to agree that there are two kinds of sleep: normal or orthodox sleep, which can itself be subdivided into various stages or depths of sleep, and paradoxical sleep, during which the sleeper appears to be in some ways deeply asleep and in other ways lightly asleep. During paradoxical sleep, most of the muscles of the body are deeply relaxed, but nonetheless grimaces and rapid movements of the eyes occur, and individual limbs may move suddenly and briefly. It seems that most, if not all, dreams occur during the paradoxical phase of sleep, that the rapid eye movements are the dreamer, as it were following the dream events in his mind's eye, and that the facial and limb movements correspond to the feelings he is having and the actions he is performing during the dream. Freud's writing on dreams takes sleep for granted, merely assuming that there is a physiological need for sleep and that the function of dreaming is to prevent repressed wishes from disturbing it. The work of later analysts, notably Lewin, suggests, however, that sleep may itself on occasion acquire symbolic meaning, the state of being asleep representing fusion with the mother's breast. In people in whom this symbolic equation is operative, excessive sleeping may constitute an enactment of regression to the breast. Insomnia may be due to ambivalence towards the breast and the ability largely to dispense with sleep, as occurs in mania, may be due to the presence of a fantasy or unconscious belief that one is fused with the breast and therefore no longer requires sleep. Experimental research suggests that there is a basic, actual, non-symbolic need for sleep, and that attempts to dispense with it or to deprive others of it are doomed to failure, and that people who claim never to sleep are deceiving themselves, as are also those who claim never to dream. Research also suggests that people who are worried and depressed, who tend to feel their problems rather than to push them aside, need more sleep than conventional pre-programmed people who run along smooth, familiar tracks, and that the extra requirement is specifically for paradoxical dream sleep. The implication of these observations is that sleep, and particularly dream sleep, has a restorative function after anxiety or stress, and perhaps after any waking reprogramming or rearrangement. Forgetting and remembering dreams. Since the physiological evidence suggests that we all dream for about a fifth of the time that we are asleep, the majority of dreams dreamt must be forgotten. Indeed, since some people claim never to dream, it must be possible for people to forget all their dreams. On the face of it, therefore, the fact that some dreams are remembered and others are forgotten, and that some people remember dreams frequently, some people remember dreams seldom, and yet others remember them never, constitutes a problem. This problem is almost always raised in connection with forgetting dreams, the tacit assumption being that dreams are experiences analogous to events or happenings, that events are normally remembered, and that it must therefore require some special explanation to account for forgetting dream events. On this view, forgetting dreams is as remarkable as, and is the same kind of phenomenon as, forgetting the whole of one's childhood, losing one's memory, or forgetting about things that are of importance in one's everyday life, all of which are instances of forgetting that are, in principle, pathological, since they impoverish one's sense of self and interfere with one's capacity to function efficiently. There is obviously something amiss if one has forgotten one's origins, if one has lost one's memory and no longer knows who one is, or if one fails to remember things that one has to do or facts that have a bearing on one's life. So if dreams really were events, forgetting them would be a form of amnesia, a forgetting of what in health would be remembered and is due to some conflict, inhibition, or repression which prevents the emergence into consciousness of wishes, thoughts, that would disturb the dreamer's waking equanimity and received conception of himself. Since most, if not all, dreams occur in the so-called paradoxical phase of sleep, characterized by rapid eye movements, it should be possible to deprive experimental subjects and animals of the opportunity to dream by awakening them from sleep the moment rapid eye movements begin, and to observe the effects of such deprivation on their waking behavior and on their later periods of sleep. To this end, human beings, presumably all volunteers, have been deprived of paradoxical sleep for up to 6 days, and cats, presumably not volunteers, have been deprived of it for up to 70 days. The most consistent finding in such dream deprivation experiments has been that the amount of paradoxical sleep, and therefore presumably dreaming, increases enormously during the sleeps immediately following cessation of the deprivation, which suggests that people and animals deprived of the opportunity to dream catch up on their lost dream sleep as soon as they can. Since the discovery that dreaming occurs mostly, if not entirely, during the paradoxical phase of sleep and is associated with rapid eye movements, it has become plausible to suppose that those animals which both sleep and display bursts of rapid eye movements intermittently while doing so dream, and that those animals which do not sleep or do not display bursts of rapid eye movements during sleep do not. Nothing resembling sleep has been observed in fishes, so presumably they do not dream. Reptiles and birds sleep, but rapid eye movements as a clearly recognizable entity do not occur, so presumably they do not dream. However, all mammals both sleep and display rapid eye movements while doing so. So presumably mammals do dream. However, all mammals other than man lack the capacity for symbolic thought. Their dreams must consist of fairly simple imagery related to their basic drives: food, sex, flight, fight, and submission. Jouvet claims, in 1965, by destroying a nucleus in the midbrain, it is possible to prepare cats which retain the capacity to move during the paradoxical phase of sleep. Such cats appear to stare fearfully at invisible objects. If asked, most people can tell one whether their dreams are colored or in black and white, but dreamers usually only spontaneously mention the presence or absence of color in any dream if either the coloration or lack of color is uncharacteristic and unlike the kind of dream to which they are accustomed, or if the color of some image appears to be a significant detail about it. The color of a person or his clothes may refer to his name, brown, green, black, or to some mental attribute which can be symbolized by color: green for callow, blue for cold or sad, red for angry or embarrassed. The color of any object appearing in a dream may indicate that it is being used as a symbol for a body surface, fluid. The intensity or lack of intensity of color in dreams is, I would imagine, correlated with the degree of vividness of mental imagery in waking life, though I have not encountered any literature on the subject. Dream incubation and visitations. A number of people are able to recall an experience in their childhood in which they were visited by some special being who blessed them, cursed them, advised them, or called them. Typically, children who have such experiences treat them as intensely private and do not tell any grown-up about them until they themselves are grown up. Typically, too, they recognize during the experience that it is not explicable by common sense, but do not categorize it as either craziness or as only a dream. In a religious setting, visitations may be regarded as a natural occurrence. The special being may be identified as Christ, a saint, or an angel, or as the devil or a demon, and the message interpreted as a call to some special way of life. In a secular setting, however, visitations have to be explained in psychological terms, as dialogues between the waking normal self or ego and the wider self speaking impersonally and authoritatively, occurring under conditions in which the subject is partly awake and partly asleep. In the few cases of which I have detailed knowledge, the visited child was alone in bed in an unfamiliar room. Benign visitations seem to mark the achievement of a precocious self-awareness which sets the child apart from other children of his own age as possessing insight beyond his years, while malignant visitations seem to herald the onset of a severe neurosis. A woman who was visited by the devil, whose blandishments she heroically resisted, spent much of her adult life under psychiatric treatment, contending with the fact that, as a child, she had teetered on the edge of making hate, not love, the center of her being. Null visitations, which consign the child to limbo, can also occur. A 7-year-old girl was lying awake in a hotel bedroom while her father was visiting her mother in a maternity hospital. An old woman entered the room and walked towards the girl's bed, seemingly about to say something to her, but she seemed to change her mind, turned around, and walked out of the room without having said anything at all. No dreams dreamt by Christ are recorded in the New Testament, and this is in striking contrast to the fact that several dreams dreamt by Buddha and Mohammed are recorded, and that much of the Quran was revealed to Muhammad in dreams. It is tempting to correlate the lack of any record of Christ's dreams with the fact that dream interpretation plays no part in Christian religious theory or practice. There are, however, Talmudic writings on dreams, and David Bagnall, in his Freud and the Jewish Mystical Tradition, has suggested that Freud was more influenced by them than is generally recognized or admitted. Anthropologists divide dreams into two kinds: individual or free dreams, which reflect the dreamer's everyday life and preoccupations, and culture pattern, or official dreams, which are prescribed by custom and induced by special rituals. Nothing analogous to culture pattern dreams exists in contemporary Western societies, since dreaming plays no part in any of our social or religious ceremonies, or in any of our techniques for making decisions, predicting the future, or diagnosing illnesses. In ancient times, however, things were very different. In ancient Egypt and in classical Greece and Rome, dream interpretation was practiced by priests and physicians, and temples existed in which clients would seek advice, prophecies, and diagnoses. In such temples, of which there are said to have been more than 300 active in Greece and the Roman Empire in the 2nd century A.D., dream incubation was practiced. The client or patient fell asleep in the temple and dreamt a dream in which the god of the temple appeared and indicated what action the dreamer should follow or what medicine he should take. Unless these temples were all fraudulent and the clients only pretended to dream, which is unlikely, dreams following dream incubation must have been culture pattern dreams, the theophanies occurring in them being evoked by the action of the atmosphere created by the temple's architecture and fittings, and the liturgical bedside manners of the priest on the dreamer's store of imagery, which must presumably always have included an image of the deity being consulted. Dream temples and dream incubation seem not to have survived the establishment of Christendom, but medieval and indeed 17th century ideas on dreams allowed for the possibility of dreams in which a priest, a guardian angel, or a god appeared and offered the dreamer advice or information, For example, Sir Thomas Browne, the physician and author of the Religio Medici, believed that the guardian spirits may sometimes order our dreams, and many strange hints, instigations, or discourses, which are so amazing unto us, may arise from such foundations. But he also thought that the phantasms of sleep do commonly walk in the great road of natural and animal dreams, wherein the thoughts and actions of the day are acted over and echoed in the night. But if people really did have dreams in which, so it seemed to them, supernatural beings appeared and offered them advice or information, these too would have to be classified as culture pattern dreams. To conclude, dreaming and waking imaginative activity resemble one another in that they both create novel results, Darwin's phrase, by uniting, condensing, and fusing images and ideas already present in the mind, and that they do so independently of the will, and in that their meaning, when they can be seen to have one, is always multiple and manifold. Furthermore, the self or agent that creates them is not the I or ego that opposes itself to the rest of the universe, but some wider, less personal self to which the I has to abandon itself, in the case of dreaming by falling asleep, in the case of waking imaginative activity by attainment of that receptive state of mind which Keats called negative capability. Although dreaming is an imaginative activity and dreams can be interpreted, dreaming only rarely produces novel results of universal appeal or significance, since the imagery used in dreams is usually too private and too dependent on the dreamer's intimate biography to be publicly comprehensible. Creative people who possess the capacity for negative capability in high degree seem to conceive of themselves as part of the macrocosm, and to lack that sense of opposition between their ego and both the outside world and their own unconscious, which renders the majority resistive to their own imaginative potentialities. And this enables them to allow themselves to make imaginative statements, which have both private and universal meaning. Freud's theory of the primary and secondary processes explains correctly what happens to imagery during imaginative activity. But Freud's assumption that the primary processes are neurotic, primitive and unrealistic, and are repressed in healthy people, insinuates the idea that both dreaming and creative waking activities are in principle neurotic. Finally, sections of this book have constituted an attempt to marry Coleridge's theory of the poetic imagination and Freud's theory of dreams, without, I hope, doing too much violence to either. Postscript. My aim has been to record some of the reflections, impressions, and ideas that have been forced upon me by 3 decades of listening to other people's dreams, of reading learned papers about the psychology of dreams and the physiology of dreaming, and of course, by more than 3 decades of myself falling asleep, dreaming, and on occasion, remembering what I have dreamt. This experience of sustained exposure to the dreams of others, and nocturnal exposure to my own, has led me to believe that dreams are best understood, even in a clinical setting, if one forgets all theories about them and ceases to think of them as discrete phenomena or items of experience, but instead responds to them as glimpses of the dreamer's total imaginative fabric. That dreams cannot possibly be either discharges of instinctual tension or attempts to communicate with others, but must be self-communings, and that dreaming must be an activity of which we are inevitably, to an extent, innocent, partly because there is more to the imagination than any individual moment of consciousness can apprehend, and partly because it bears a relationship to conscious selfhood. Analogous of that to the wind hover, it sustains in flight, omnipresent and yet not in its particularities perceptible. The wind-hover is indeed the central image of this book. It has been at the back of my mind even when no glimpse of it has appeared on the page. Gerard Manley Hopkins must therefore have the last word. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dappled dawn drawn falcon in his riding, of the rolling level underneath him steady air and striding. Here there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding rebuffed, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind, my heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of, the thing. Brute beauty and valor and act, O air pride, plume, here buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told, lovelier, more dangerous, O my chevalier! No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine, and blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion.